In the first episode of Grain, David Anderson Sr., an immigrant from Ireland, makes his mark in the milling industry. In the depths of the Depression, Dave's son Harold leaves the security of the National Biscuit Company to venture out on his own. Personal tragedies, a world war, and 2 business failures are just a few of the challenges he faces before the Anderson Elevator Company sees success in 1947. In the second episode of Grain, the company begins to diversify with the warehouse market. A minus is turned into a plus with corn cobs, but grain remains the company's mainstay and more storage is needed. The Big Pour makes national news, and the Andersons then becomes a world player with its riverfront elevator facility.
Explore new worlds and new ideas through programs like this, made available for everyone through contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
The Andersons' 25th anniversary was celebrated in 1972, with annual sales reaching nearly $200 million. Management had passed on to the next generation, and John, the oldest, was there to lead the company through the 1970s. And what a prosperous time it was. The decade saw remarkable growth in the grain business, fueled by a worldwide credit boom, increased U.S. grain production, and mounting demand from Western Europe, Russia, and Japan. Indiana was the next state the company set up shop. The city of Delphi received a 4 million bushel grain elevator and a cob mill. Grain sales were matched by those of fertilizer as potash and urea began arriving by boat and unit trains from Canada and western states. The retail division in Maumee had long outgrown the warehouse market and moved across the street to a much larger facility. A suburban housing boom and increased interest in do-it-yourself remodeling contributed to the store's popularity. Diversification continued as one part of the business became the springboard for the next new division, but corn was king, and the Andersons' grain receipts soared from 62.1 million bushels in 1970 to 175 million bushels in 1979. The company's export business was phenomenal until December 24, 1979. On that date, Russia invaded Afghanistan. Within weeks of the attack, President Carter placed a grain embargo on any shipments scheduled for the USSR. Shortly thereafter, the European Union revised and strengthened its common agricultural policy, which, in essence, put sizable tariffs on imports of grain and other farm products. Grain dealers in the rest of the country weren't as hard hit as the Andersons was. Countries like Japan to the west, for instance, were actually increasing their imports from grain elevators in central and western states. But the Andersons' export business suffered dramatically with the loss of its 2 biggest customers.
That was a huge adjustment. In 1980, about 95% of all the grain we bought was exported. By 1983, that number was down to 30%. And we had to try to figure out, how do you make those adjustments? That was a time when I was in the catbird seat, and that was a time to reinvent everything. And we tried a lot of things. Fortunately, we got through it, but it was not an easy time at all. But it's how do you turn a minus into a plus? You learn how to make yourself better. One of the things we didn't do is make a lot of money. We built a fine organization.
Even though President Reagan lifted the embargo in 1981, the climate for selling overseas radically changed. Focus switched from world markets to domestic customers. The business then shifted to a system of country elevators and more facilities that could load unit trains that would allow the farmer to move grain to a location closer to home. The strategies that had worked all along would have to be dramatically altered. The company was in survival mode. By 1986, domestic grain shipments had improved, but grain receipts were a far cry from the late 1970s. There would have to be some belt tightening.
You had to get into your cost structure, and you had to deal with, for the first time in the early 80s, you had to deal with people who had been loyal, who had been talented, who had worked hard, would fulfill everything that we ever asked him to do, and say, you know what, I always thought if you're honest and willing to work, you'll be safe here. Now I gotta tell you, I'm convinced you'll do better somewhere else, at least for a while. And we had to tell, people middle and up, probably 100 of them. So some of your real close friends, and when they give up on you, that's hard to swallow.
With grain taking such a hit, the company looked to its other divisions for growth, or at least some stability. Wholesale fertilizer was one such area, and so the company utilized existing facilities to expand the capacity for storage of the dry ingredients. Lawn fertilizer also began looking to create more products for the everyday consumer. Retail expansion was tested with several new general stores in the Toledo and Columbus, Ohio areas. The 1980s also saw a big change in the corporate structure. John Anderson died in 1986, and Dick, the youngest brother, replaced him as chief executive officer. An 11-member board of directors, including 2 people from outside the company, was elected, with Tom serving as chairman of the board.
In a family company, you get some habits that aren't good. You get resistance to each other, sibling rivalries, and so forth. We probably had the least amount of that I could imagine in any company where you got 5 brothers working together for a career. But nonetheless, you need somebody to break that. And all of my siblings were such good people. They could see it when they saw outsiders come in and put their disciplines on us, by some of the people that we were fortunate enough to get on our board.
In 1988, a severe drought caused major damage to crops in the area. In retrospect, it was a primer for dealing with future adverse weather conditions, like the drought of 2012. In 1989, it rained so much that spring planting was prevented in much of the region. In December of that year, a fire destroyed 27,000 tons of corn cobs in Delphi. Everybody was glad to say goodbye to the 1980s. Harold's vision for his partnership included not just his immediate family, but grandchildren. Lots of grandchildren. Every time a new child was born into the family, he or she would become an equal partner in trust with all other family members. But the partnership structure that had worked for 50 years was experiencing growing pains. By 1996, the Andersons was comprised of 218 partners. Of the 70 family partners, 58 were members of the third generation who owned the majority of the business. So, for the survival of the company, management and the board began to evaluate the soundness of their current business structure.
About a year before Dad died, I was talking to him one day, and the third generation was just starting to come on. And I could see different philosophies showing up, different attitudes, different expectations. And I said, Dad, what are we going to do with all these kids? I remember thinking, this guy's thought all this through. And he made the most interesting statement. It was just the right statement, too. He says, you'll figure something out. That's what we did. Now, when you had all those players and everybody wanting something different, and more demand to run well-balanced, very fair, hard-working, very creative thing that's not going to be influenced by a lot of family stuff. There are some structures out there, and one of them is the public structure. And set everybody free.
Prior to going public, the family was involved in numerous discussions concerning the farm.
Time marches on, and as it has marched on, many of us have talked about, what's the future of this property? Well, the most likely thing, of course, would be development. And there wasn't a single family member that was at all interested in having it developed, even though it could have been fairly lucrative. And so we gave a good share of the property to Metro Parks. And also we optioned the part that the lake's on, and they can exercise the option after my generation is gone.
On February 20th, 1996, the Andersons, Inc. began trading on the NASDAQ under the symbol ANDY. Another event that defined the decade was the handing over of leadership to the third generation. In 1996, Mike Anderson, John's second oldest, was named President and Chief Operating Officer. Tom was named Chairman Emeritus, and Dick became Chairman and Chief Executive Officer. In 1999, Mike assumed the role of CEO and Dick moved into the position of non-executive chairman.
One of the most important strategic issues that every organization has to face, and they face it constantly, but that's the issue of the succession of executive leadership. I thought sure that when my generation passed through, it would be very hard to hold on to the cultural aspects, the real dedication to service that we've had ever since the beginning, starting with Dad's and Mom's example. And I've said many times, I think today it's stronger than it's ever been here. It was not a hard decision to say Mike was the best choice. And what he and the remarkable team that he's developed has accomplished since that has made us all mighty proud, I'll tell you. And in fact, I'll take credit for that being the best decision I ever made.
The reality is I had just some fantastic role models. I had the good fortune of working closely with my dad, I had the good fortune of living right next to Grandpa and Grandma, and then to have all these years with Dick and the strong team that's been here. As a result, we have grown into a company that has 6 strong operating groups.
Every weekday morning, the call goes out.
Let's light this candle.
The Grain Group, the group on which the company was originally founded, includes terminals in Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Nebraska, with storage capacity of 115 million bushels. In 2003, the Andersons formed a joint venture with the Lansing Trade Group. Lansing is focused on merchandising physical commodities both domestically and overseas. And when it comes to moving grain, nobody can surpass the logistics developed by the merchandisers in the United States.
Anderson's Billy speaking, may I help you?
A very significant portion of our agricultural output goes to overseas markets, and it's been that way 20, 30, 40 years. So we've built a really robust infrastructure. We can move grains in a variety of different ways, move them very quickly so we don't degrade the quality of the crop, far better than any other country in the world.
But if you're the farmer, before you transport it, you have to grow it. Then you have to sell it. And that's where the Grain Group comes in.
Their grain marketing toolbox, if you will, has grown tremendously from when the Andersons started. And predominantly it's because the market is far more sophisticated today than it was then. It's truly a world market. The growers are much, much bigger. We got the 80-20 rule. We got 20% of the growers in the United States growing 80% of the crop. And they're managing tens of thousands of acres. So they're business people as much as they are, let's say, operational farmers. So we have evolved with the grower sophistication and offering a variety of risk management and marketing tools to help them basically achieve the highest revenue per acre we can without incurring an undue amount of price risk. The team here at the Andersons has really evolved with their growing needs.
Hi, this is Mike Mock with the closing comments for Thursday, April 26th. We had a very unusual day. Strong cash markets were reflected in very strong bull spreading activity. I've got 6 charts we want to take a peek at. The first one is the May versus July corn.
We
as you can
get,
see, the spread
on average,
steadily
4,000
firmer
viewers
the last
every day, as high as 8,000 viewers.
A lot of talk about cash
And
bids.
with very little advertising or fanfare. People come to our website just to watch the video.
That's all I got for you now. We'll talk to you first thing tomorrow. Have a good evening.
You know, there's no more productive farmer in the world than the United States farmer.
Stick a fork in that pig.
It's not your typical store, a place where you can put a towel, a tree, a plumbing fixture, a pair of boots, some dog food, and a nice Chardonnay, all in the same shopping cart.
It still sounds pretty bizarre. It is an unusual product offering. It still is an unusual product offering. And it didn't happen by grand design. This was not a strategy that we cooked up back in the 50s. It happened more by evolution than anything else, and by searching the market for opportunities. You know, it was originally farm supplies.
From feed, seed, and fertilizer to household goods to a full-fledged nursery, the years of inventory yielded lots and lots of items. Then came the idea.
What about selling produce? It's kind of a farm market approach, and we started doing that, and that worked. It really worked, and the deli was not far behind that. It was a small deli offering, but that worked as well.
Another idea that worked was wine.
And our timing was perfect there. The financials in the wine business are just excellent, so that we were able to put in about 3,000 square feet of wine with very knowledgeable service, and nobody was doing that at the time, and we've built quite a wine business.
So buy a bottle of wine or anything else you need at one of the 6 Anderson store locations. Oh, and come hungry.
Today, half of our business is food, specialty food. 65% of our customers are female, and so our customer now is so dramatically different than what we were seeing in the early 50s. We've just responded to the marketplace.
This is a basic problem. To feed 6.6 billion people without fertilizer, forget it. The game is over. So said Nobel laureate Dr. Norman Borlaug, the father of the Green Revolution and advocate of plant nutrition as a means of bettering the human condition.
We're expecting by 2050 the population to grow to upwards of 9 billion people, based on the fact that fertilizer is responsible for that 40 to 60% of food production, and the fact that grain stocks worldwide are relatively low. We need to make sure that we're producing maximum yields on the acres that we have in this world. The plant nutrient industry has done a much better job over the years in terms of precision agriculture and making sure that we're targeting the right nutrients to the crop.
The company has come a long way since the 1950s when they were handling only 3 ingredients.
Today, we're handling hundreds of fertilizer products. We have roughly 860,000 tons of fertilizer capacity. About 450,000 tons of that is dry storage, and roughly 400,000 tons would be liquid storage.
About 90% of the plant nutrient group is focused on the wholesale market. The other 10% is there to assist individual growers.
We have 11 farm centers within the plant nutrient group, specifically designed to do business directly with our farmer customers. We do a number of things, including soil sampling and testing. We make agronomic recommendations, and we use a lot of target application to make sure that we're not putting too much or too little nutrient on a field. Agriculture should not be isolated from society. We need, as an industry, to teach people where their food comes from so they're making informed decisions about what they're eating. We also have environmental responsibilities, and one of our roles in that is to provide training to make sure farmers are not only producing the best crops, the highest yields that they possibly can, but also they're taking care of the environment.
By the late 1950s, homeowners were beginning to take more interest in their lawns. So it was natural that fertilizer products for farmers would redefine themselves for the suburban homeowner, who allowed more time for leisure activities like gardening and golf.
It would be easier to talk about where Anderson products aren't than where they are. We are in virtually every major course in the United States. We are also in some of the most beautiful courses around the world. We also are on non-golf places around the world. For example, the field that the World Soccer Champs play on. What we've chosen as a direction is to create products that are based on our formulation capabilities. Anderson's has a particular talent at formulating granules. And in 2008, we won a grant with the state of Ohio, particularly focused on reducing spray drift and runoff. And I'm proud to say that Anderson's has not only met but exceeded the expectations that were set up in this grant, and that was in the form of generating jobs and generating cumulative sales. And it was done with our technology, with use of biomaterials, which leads to the fact that this group is also the cob business, one of the original companies that took a waste stream and began to make value-added products out of it.
The amazing corn cob continues to find useful applications. The latest being cat litter.
We have 30-plus patents or patent pendings on formulated products, on carriers, and cat litter and litters in general. Our group has a strategy to be technology-centric. We have chosen to offer products that are proprietary, either supported by patents or trade secrets to make them unique and to give us a position that doesn't quickly become commoditized.
It was 1988, and Chuck Brown, who worked in a clerical position in the company's traffic department, had an idea.
What if we started repairing rail cars and eventually lease them? I told him that yes, we can repair some rail cars. And I was running company's steel fabrication business and engineering department, and I didn't know anything about rail cars.
But the fab shop crew did know about fixing other things, so management agreed to purchase 100 junk rail cars.
We were so new at this that we had estimated a certain amount of money to repair the cars, but we exceeded that by 2 times. And that wasn't a pretty sight in this building.
But those 100 cars served as an invaluable training ground that would get the group up to speed.
When you don't know a whole lot about something and then you go out and buy 100 cars, it is truly baptism by fire. We were just so fortunate that we had people who had the right skills that allowed us to get into this business.
As the repair side expanded, the group started looking for deals to grow the leasing arm of the business. By 1995, the company owned about 2,500 cars. That number doubled by 2003.
And that's when a small company that they had a fleet of about 11,000 rail cars and 200 locomotives, and asked us if we were interested in buying them. Market conditions were not that good when we were first approached for this. Right after we closed, the market really turned in our favor. And so I'd rather be lucky than good any day.
The fleet has grown to over 23,000 cars. The number of repair shops is 12 and counting. The variety of services offered has created a niche market, a one-stop shop for rental, repair, reconfiguration, and financing.
When you have 23,000 rail cars, and if you assign a nominal value of $30,000 to each, that's $700 million. There is no way a company can do all of that kind of growth from internally generated funds. They have to have a good financing arm that allows them to fund those assets.
And so the financing arm of the rail group continues to hone its skills at structuring the leasing transactions that will allow the group and the company to grow.
We invested in a short line railroad in Iowa. For years to come, we're going to continue to expand because long term, rail lines and how we move bulk merchandise, a lot of it is going to be done by rail. And so we are fulfilling that important segment of the overall commerce.
In many respects, it would seem perfectly natural for the Andersons to venture into its newest and youngest group. After all, the company had 60-plus years of experience in handling corn. But in the early part of the millennium, the business was looking at the ethanol industry from an entirely different perspective.
At the time, I was involved with our grain business, and I was more concerned about evaluating the ethanol industry from the defensive standpoint. What could this do, for example, to impair our grain business?
After 9/11, the whole country seemed to focus on finding alternative sources of fuel, but still the Andersons' move into ethanol was one that took substantial consideration.
The whole concept of building a major industrial plant with its inherent costs and technology was something brand new to the Andersons. It was a big investment. Our first plant was an $87 million project, and it was a brand new strategic direction for the company. And so consequently, it took a little getting used to before people became comfortable enough to consider that as an investment strategy.
In 2007, the Andersons began operation at their second ethanol facility in Clymers, Indiana. Greenville, Ohio was next. A partnership was formed with Marathon Petroleum Company in 2008, and in 2012, Denison, Iowa became the group's fourth ethanol site.
If you've traveled around in rural areas of Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, you'll know that over the past few years, many of those areas have been affected negatively by the downturn in the economy. Well, in the case of ethanol, we take a major industrial project, build it in a rural area near the corn supply, and provide construction jobs, supply and vendor jobs, repair and maintenance jobs, as well as direct employment at the plant. And then, in addition to that, a significant amount of dollars that we return to those local communities through the corn that we buy, as well as the other economic activity that benefit those local communities.
Call it a leap of faith or business as usual, but the ethanol group, like the others, happened because someone was listening.
The culture of our company has always been one to encourage initiative and investigation of new opportunities and a little bit of entrepreneurism, and consequently I was allowed to continue to look into that until we got to a point of being willing to get more involved in the industry.
The company also has a culture of recognizing talent, like Hal Reed, who, after 33 years with the Andersons, now manages the 6 operating groups.
Each of the groups was created out of an adjacency of something we already did, a talent that we already had, a skill set that we already had, or a need that our customers had. But truly, they came out of the question that was just brought to the table that said, what if? As we look to the future, we don't know exactly what the next business group will be, but we do know one thing for certain. It will serve all of our constituents in a manner that's consistent with our statement of principles.
Our statement of principles is a document that really speaks to what we stand for. It articulates the values of the company. That document is summarized in our mission statement. And in our mission statement, we talk about our objective to serve others and to do it as a team. In doing that, we'll accomplish 4 things. One's to provide extraordinary service to our customers. Another is to help each other develop. The third is to grow the value of the company. And if we do those 3 well, it puts us in a position to accomplish the 4th.
I remember their father saying, "You get a good living out of your community. Never forget that you owe them a debt of gratitude."